Hi, today I want to talk about how life will feel 10 years from now in 2035. So there are so many videos out there talking about how many robots there will be and how powerful artificial intelligence is going to be. But today I want to talk more about how these changes will actually impact your life in 10 years time. And especially I want to talk about how the hamster wheel will be a thing of the past. So what is the hamster wheel? Well, it has many names. It's also called, for example, the rat race. So it's basically the way of life that many, especially families, know. We get up maybe at 6 o'clock, get the kids to school, off to some form of office work that we need to pick up the kids, make some food for them, and pretty much we are off to bed. So, and everything repeats then the following days, and then you do have a short weekend, and then you're back in the hamster wheel. And I think this is one of the really exciting things about technology and how I think the next 10 years will change. I think the hamster wheel will become a thing of the past. And I think this is one of the major positive impacts of technology. So let's talk about it. Let's try to unpack how I believe that this will happen. But why should you listen to me about it? Well, my name is Daniel Kafer, and I've spent the last 3 years writing a book about hyperintelligence and researching about what the future is going to look like. Further, I'm working together with a platform called Supertrends that has 150 experts making more than 4,000 predictions about what the world will look like in the future. So at least I'm in a decent position to give this my best shot. So let's talk about the hamster wheel. For most people, it seems like life just has to be like the hamster wheel. They have never tried anything else. But if you go back to prehistoric times, for example, the hunter society, there was no hamster wheel. Basically, people would go out and hunt for animals to eat. And once they had enough food, they would have more time to relax and talk around the bonfire. So I'm not saying they were not busy. They probably used most of their time trying to gather food, but still they had a lot more freedom. They didn't have to clock in at some office or factory at 9 and leave at 5. The other part of the hamster wheel would of course be the children who are in schools and the education system in general, and they also need to kind of clock in at 8 o'clock and clock out at potentially 2 o'clock or similar. So later, when we started to get food from agriculture, we got a little bit more structure on our work, but it was first during the Industrial Revolution where we had factories and you had to clock in at a certain time that we really had the hamster wheel established. And especially when the women also joined the workforce, we got the hamster wheel that we know today. So the good news is this is not just guesswork. We are already seeing cracks in the hamster wheel. I think especially COVID did a lot to actually demonstrate that we don't need the hamster wheel for society to function. During COVID, a lot of companies saw that many functions could actually be carried out without people meeting in the office. So I do know that there have been some counter reaction and some companies are saying, no, we should meet in the office. And I'm actually not saying that for work that people shouldn't meet. It does make sense to meet. What I personally hate about the hamster wheel is the lack of flexibility, that somebody else is setting the rules for your life, that you need to get up at a certain time, clock in to an office and drop off your kids. I mean, in reality, it should be all about results, right? You want your kids to learn, you want them to understand the different topics and be successful later in life, and you want them, of course, to interact with other kids. The same goes for yourself at work, right? You want results, you want companies to grow, you want everybody to profit. But in my opinion, you don't need the rigid rules that we have today. And I think here technology is actually helping quite a lot. So what I'm saying here is, I think that the 9 to 5 grind that most of us are exposed to for the majority of our lives, it's basically a historical thing. It didn't used to be like this, and nobody says it has to be like this in the future. I think the 9 to 5 grind is made and optimized for machines, not for humans. I think there are definitely better opportunities out there. And let's try and unpack what we're actually seeing right now. So first of all, let's have a look at how we define different work. So in terms of remote and non-remote work, there's a definition called remote capable work. So for example, if you're working at McDonald's and you're servicing people, you're flipping burgers, well, it's not really remote capable work at the moment. And there are lots of examples of this: factory work, for example, or work where you somehow need to engage with people physically. But this is not a static situation. Like imagine, for example, if we take the McDonald's example, if the robots are flipping burgers, maybe in the future you just need a supervisor that could be remote supervising the robots, for example. So non-remote jobs can become remote capable jobs. And if we look at the graph over here, we actually see how the remote capable jobs exploded during COVID. We needed to make changes in order to make jobs remote capable because we were simply not able to meet in the office. We also see that the kind of slight counter reaction then in the following years. But then on the other hand, what I think is that different technologies will push more and more jobs into being remote capable. And I will come back to that, but it's basically the more advanced AI gets, the more advanced robotics get, and the more advanced virtual reality gets, then the more jobs will become remote capable. And then again, there are tons of jobs that are actually remote capable, but then companies still do not allow workers to either have a situation where they have a hybrid job or they have a fully remote job. It could be a lack of trust, for example, but there could also be other reasons for it. They might feel that it's simply more efficient to have people together in the way that they communicate. I think there will be a major shift in both the work that are defined as remote capable, but also in terms of how the employers will view the efficiency gains of having hybrid jobs. So when looking at surveys, this is something people really want. Very few workers actually prefer a situation where they have to go into the office 5 days a week. And the same goes for education. People generally want flexibility. And of course, on the other hand, companies, they want results. So there needs, of course, to be checks and balances when it comes to remote work to make sure that people actually carry out their tasks. But so what I expect to see in the next 10 years is a quite dramatic shift to what we'll call remote capable work. And I also see we're already seeing the shift with companies actually allowing people hybrid work situations. And I also think it will more and more be a demand for the high end, the most sought after employees. So they're saying, well, I will actually only choose companies where I have the freedom and flexibility to do hybrid or remote. So I think it will be a parameter for competition for the best minds around the world. And I think when it comes to education, I also think there will be a huge shift in the coming years. We see some countries simply not allowing homeschooling or remote schooling. But that said, more and more schools are embracing setups where you can join remotely. And we also saw during COVID how it's actually possible. So I think the technology that will drive the most of this will be artificial intelligence, because a lot of the more kind of routine tasks that we're spending a lot of time on will be done by agents. It also means, for example, that even jobs where you couldn't really imagine it being remote, let's say, for example, a skincare doctor, a lot of it will be done remotely in the future. For example, if you're worried about a mold or similar, normally you would have a consultation where the doctor would just look at your skin, and maybe the second one you would actually get the removal of the mold. So here, at least, you would save the first consultation that could be online, where it could be mainly AI actually analyzing the skin and diagnosing what the issue is. And then when that is done, you could go and get the surgery. The surgery might eventually be made by robots, but even with people involved, we at least reduce the face time to half. And of course, so artificial intelligence here is one, but the second parameter would of course be robots. And I think we'll see the robot revolution slightly later than the artificial intelligence revolution, but it's definitely coming. The third parameter I think that's really important would be virtual reality, especially for learning, but also for meetings. So for example, I have had a lot of virtual meetings in my life, and sometimes it has been difficult to drive major changes through these virtual meetings. I mean, even in today's world, we've had, internet not being optimal at all times, for example, which has meant that there's a lack of quality, a lack in the way that we can communicate. Also, just running a PowerPoint virtually, it's not the same as being in the room. I believe that with virtual reality advancing, it will be much more like actually being in a room together. And I'll get back to the technology around that. But also, the more we're globalized, it doesn't make sense to be 9 to 5 if you're dealing with the rest of the world. There are different time zones, so it's more about actually being available when you are needed. But let's jump to virtual reality. So today, most meetings are still just Zoom calls or team meetings. With any luck, we'll have stable internet and we can show each other PowerPoint presentations, etc. But it's still relatively limited. Of course, it would be possible to do VR video calls, but we are still at a level with the technology where it's not quite there. I think there's still kind of the weight of the VR set that's annoying. You're actually using it for more than 1 hour. You don't really feel comfortable, but this is changing. I think as we move towards 2035, it will be much more immersive and it will be much more comfortable, just like wearing a set of glasses, for example. You could feel fully immersed in another environment, and it would be very natural to kind of present and talk to people, and sometimes maybe even better than in real life with no disturbances that you would have in a normal office. So I think the VR impact will be quite great, and I think it will both limit the time you need in office, but it will also limit the time you need to, for example, travel and meet the clients. So let's talk about the cognitive aspect. So this is, of course, where artificial intelligence will change a lot of things. We are talking a lot about how AGI may even make humans obsolete, and that may or may not happen, but at least it will limit a lot of routine work that can be done by AI agents. So you could say that the need for humans to work as much as we do today is probably reduced. I think we could compare it to the hunters. If they suddenly had machine guns, they would spend less time hunting and more time enjoying. I think AI and AI agents could work the same way for people, that they could maybe spend more time on making the right decisions together with AI and less time on the more boring execution part. So the final part would be the humanoid robots. So advanced artificial intelligence without robots is a little bit like a brain in a jar. We are seeing how AI with AI agents is kind of coming out of that jar, with AI being able to control computers and actually use tools and do things. But the second we have humanoid robots, we are giving the AI arms and legs. So that will mean a major shift, but there will be a huge difference between the robots coming out in 2026 and 2027 and the robots we'll have in 2035 and the robots will have nearer to 2050. So while of course the new robots coming out in 2026, 2027, they'll be very useful, but I think we'll mainly see them in factories. They will in some instances be relatively slow, and it will be hard to for example, it will be hard to employ them in a lot of situations, like for example a waiter in a restaurant, because it's a complex environment to navigate. So I think in many ways it will be a gradual experience of the types of jobs it will be able to replace. But by 2035, I think we'll see the dexterity of robots and the versatility and the way it uses artificial intelligence together with the inputs it is getting from vision and touch. So at that point, I think it will be very capable and being able to do most tasks that humans are able to do today. Again, one fear would of course be that now it's replacing all jobs, but I would rather want to look at it as a value add, saying, we humans will have to do less, but we can achieve more with having artificial intelligence and robots. So let's just stay a little bit with the robot situation. So I've tried to look at estimates for how many robots we could expect, and it looks like most estimates say that there would be around 2 million robots, for example, in the US, perhaps a little bit less in the EU, and a little bit more in China. So what does that mean? Well, first of all, it's only like 1% of the adult population. So it doesn't mean we have a society where you see robots everywhere, almost outnumbering people. It will still be relatively rare to see robots compared to people in most work situations. However, in many types of labor, the robot in 2035 will probably be 10x as effective as a human. First of all, because it can work 24/7, it doesn't take any breaks. At that time, the speed and efficiency is probably also higher than humans. So that means that one robot could probably replace 10 people. So for the math to add up, that will say that probably 25% of all jobs would be replaced. That doesn't mean that there will be 25% unemployment, but that could mean that we are less stressed, we get more time back to do more interesting things. If we look at the distribution of these robots, obviously many of them will be in factories, in warehousing, some will be in retail, some will be in healthcare, and that also means that in our everyday lives, we will not stumble into robots just about everywhere. So I don't think by 2035 we will see that robotic society yet. I think some families will have implemented a robot to do housework, but at this point, not every family. But let's look at the job erosion of AI and robots combined. So for the US job market, it's not unrealistic that robots could replace maybe 25 million jobs, and AI and software agents could replace another 30 to 40 million jobs. But again, we should remember that every time technology has replaced jobs, new jobs have been created. So this could be the situation again. It could simply also just mean that we're getting some of our time back, relating back to what we just talked about, getting out of the hamster wheel. So let's try and look at what does this actually mean for the individual family. So today, most families, they need to get up at around 6 o'clock, driving kids to school, rushing to work, clocking in at 9, leaving at 5, and leaving at 5, and so on. So I think there's a potential for, let's say, 70% of all families to get out of that situation within the next 10 years. So I think we should imagine a scenario where there's a hybrid school and there's hybrid work. So you don't need to get up most mornings this early. Like let's say for the children, for example, let's imagine a 10-year-old kid could do most of the work from home with both virtual teachers, but also real teachers teaching virtually. But then again, combined with AI tutoring as well as watching educational videos. So I think it's going to be a mix. And then there will be social time where I do think some of it could be remote, but it could also be groups in real life in designated places, maybe not schools. It could be places that are more inspirational for play. So let's imagine this day where the dad and the mom, they are not actually going to a workplace. The child is not going to a school. Instead, we're seeing a situation where they may be around 9-ish or 10-ish, depending on the need. They log on, they have some virtual meetings, they start the learning process, they start the working process. Then maybe they have a break. Then they take their children to, let's call it this, learning or this playing facility. And then they go back, do a little bit of more work, and then they do some social activities. And then again, if the timing allows it, maybe they want to put everything on their head, doing more fun stuff with the children during the day and doing some of the work during the evening. So I think we'll see a much more flexible situation for most families in the future. And finally, I do get a lot of comments of people saying, well, how can we finance this? Because if you have super flexible work, will you be able to make the same amount of money? And I think let's look at it like this. If we get a couple of million robots into the workforce plus AI agents, that should bump up our production, which means our GDP. per capita, so that means what we produce per person in the society, would be higher 10 years from now, just as it is quite a lot higher today than it was 10 years ago. So we'll have more value in the society to go around. And the other question is then, well, how will that value be distributed? And I think that's a topic for a whole nother video. But the society should generally be a richer society with a lot more freedom and without the dreaded hamster wheel. At least that is my vision. I do believe it's realistic that it is going to happen. But we'd love to hear your thoughts. What do you think? Do you want to get out of the hamster wheel? And do you think it will happen for you and your family in the next 10 years? Leave a message in the comments. Thank you.